Hey, this is Nyambura, and this is Swayuba Podcast, the Audible African Woman. We are excited to be doing an election series, and my guest today is Joy. Joy will introduce herself in a short while, but for this episode and for this series, we'll be talking about how young women experience elections. Now, in Kenya and in general, Africa, when we speak about how women experience elections, we tend to have a bias around women who are running for office. But today we want to understand or talk about women as voters and what the experiences are with a bias, as I said, for young women. And Joy, I would want us to get to know you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Mala. I am a writer and an artist, but then I'm also very passionate about governance, about youth, and the arts. And this has really informed the areas that I've been able to work in. So I work as a project manager for I've worked as a project manager for artist organizations, for media organizations, for design worlds, and currently I'm also the project manager at Tazama World Media. So this ties into my work strongly because all of these have dealt with empowering the youth in all these arena, whether it's the arts, whether it's in media, teaching about community journalism, and then of course, then my podcast. My podcast is called Kisima Podcast. It's a podcast which is also a youth roundtable where we discuss governance issues, we discuss civic education, and then, of course, a bit of social commentary. Thank you for having me.
We are happy to have you, and I think you're the best person to have this conversation because when talking to you earlier, we were discussing about when is the first time women in Kenya actually voted, and you alluded that women in Kenya actually first voted in 1957, where we had to. It was during the colonial rule, and the Africans had to choose their eight council members.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's always in my mind. It's always been 1963, but it was interesting to know that 1957. But take us through the historicity of what women and voting in Kenya has been since.
So I like that we are getting to this now from the voter perspective because a lot of the times people talk about women voting, but in terms of candidacy, like how many women are running for office. But then we cannot exclude the historical context from this because politically, socially, there's a historical context that led us to where we are.
This is true.
So we go back to when Kenyan women were fighting colonialism alongside the Mau Mau,
Yeah.
right? So they participated in all this. Were a lot of them needed to help the Mau Mau.
Yeah, my grandmother was a spy.
Oh my God, I need to start this point again, Doris.
My grandmother was a spy. Yeah, God.
So let's go back to how Kenyan women contributed in dismantling colonialism. This was way back, like when Harry Thuku was arrested in 1922 as the leader of Young Kikuyu Association. It was the women who rallied and protested to have him released. So women have been part of the colonial struggle. And then comes the Mau Mau period, where women took part in providing foodstuffs for the Mau Mau,
Yeah.
providing messages and telling
Spying
them
and
what's
all.
happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also some of them actually took part as generals and fought alongside the Mau Mau, and they were also beaten and tortured alongside the men.
Yeah.
Then as we go down the history line, in the 1940s, when the settlers came in, it was the families in central Kenya and in Rift Valley who were displaced. And so you find that women had to now take up labor, get paid to work because they've been dispossessed of their land.
This is true. Yeah.
Right? So at this time also, they are taking part in the struggle, but being
Their roles are also changing. In terms
their roles
of,
are also
yeah,
changing.
Yeah.
And so women would protest by avoiding going to work. Like they just decide that they're not showing up.
Yeah.
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 So women and children were put in the coffee farms, but some women would decide to protest. And so by the 1957, by the time that no, in pre-colonial Kenya, like people who had attained the right to vote could vote. But then this was not until 1957 now, when the Legislative Council actually allowed for African representatives. And so they were to elect 8 members representing each of the counties to go vote. But then this also came with several conditions,
I
right?
learned you had to. Also, there were. It was not one person, one vote.
No,
I,
it was not one person, one vote. So they had all these conditions. You had to meet the education criteria, that to be educated to a certain level, and wealth qualifications. So specifically, the criteria were these: have an intermediate school education, or an income of 120 euros, or property up to 500 euros.
for
And then
dispossessed people, how was that even possible?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then have served several years in government employment, or have outstanding service in the country. So now you look at all these qualifications, and then you look at the women. The women who, first of all, they've been dispossessed of their land, so probably they have to work, which was majorly about, like we can call it slave labor,
Yeah.
because the payment wasn't that much for them to have that amount in their
Mostly it
accounts.
was actually done in food stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So to meet this criteria, of course, women were socially, politically, economically disadvantaged so much. So to have all of these criteria meant that you had several votes. You could cast up to 3 votes. But now, if you lacked most of these and all of these, then means you have no vote, while someone else has up to 3 votes. So at this time, by the time that in the 1957 votes, voting for the LegCo, there was up to upwards of 100,000 voters, and only 917 of these
Oh,
were
wow.
women.
Yeah.
So it shows the discrepancy from the very beginning.
So we could say that voter inequality was actually structured from here.
Yeah, voter inequality was structured very much so, because men had access to more resources, much as everyone was under the colonial period and they were suffering. Men had access that allowed them eligibility.
Yeah, it's also because men were mostly the laborers in cash crop plantations. Yeah,
True, true.
and all the things that you said. Yeah,
Yeah. So up until 1963 is when, like, the constitution allowed for everyone who had attained the voting age and had an ID or a Kenyan passport to just be a voter. So that took a while. And then it meant that all the decisions being made even then lacked the woman voters'
voters'
perspective.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? So come from 1963, come 2010, where we have a new constitution and we have an Article 38 that says that upholds every citizen has a right to free, fair, and regular elections based on universal suffrage, and that is good. But then we also see that even in today's in the upcoming elections, women did not come out as 27 had was, but also it's that the young people, where women and young people fall in terms of demographics, is that there seems to be existing barriers from what you said, but even today, they look at their factors that are still holding women against away from voting. Would you touch on some of this could be?
Yeah, and I think there are several, but some of the most glaring still ties onto the economic loop. Now look at for the 2009 census, you find that most of the population in Kenya are actually, I think, up to 70.1% are under 35. So these are youth.
Yeah.
And then majority of the women who are employed, up to 70% of employed women, no, of all the women employed, 70% of them are self-employed.
Self-employed.
So this also offers a challenge when it comes to the election period. That much as they've been allowed to vote, of course they can exercise that right. Very few of them would leave their hustles to go and take part in the voting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's gonna take a whole day. You are supposed to start queuing from 4 a.m. and probably the queues will be so long. And some of these police stations we've experienced, like, it's kind of disorganized, and that entire hassle, because it's not just some kind of a seamless process, much as IEBC has really tried, and formerly ECK. it's not yet so streamlined that you can just leave your house, go cast your vote, and come
I
back
come
home.
back. Yeah.
Like there'll be so
They,
much,
we,
there'll
we
be
still have
so
longer
much
queues
happening.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for this reason, economic empowerment also plays a role. Like
Yeah.
if a lot of them maybe were employed, and this means like young women, young
Young women and men.
just
Yeah.
youth, yeah.
Youth. Yeah.
If a lot of them were employed, then they could take advantage of the public holiday on the election day.
I
But
mean,
then if you're self-employed, how do you leave your business? How do you leave your mambamboga business or whatever that you're doing to just go queue for a whole day and vote? So that's one of the challenges.
it's funny when you say that because earlier on when we were coming in, we say democracy or livelihood. And we said, livelihood because you know what, democracy might be here for the longest time and they might work for you or not.
Yeah.
But then your livelihood matters the day it does,
It
right?
matters the most
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, no one is gonna come feed you, much as you, much as you queued to vote, right?
This is true.
Yeah. And then also in the queues, there's more challenges that come to play. So the so there was a report done by the Kenyan Human Rights Commission, partnering with UN, that showed that during the election periods, the number of GBV cases,
SGBV cases go up.
SDBV cases
Yeah.
rise.
So for a country that almost 45% of women between the age of is it 18 and 40 or 49 have without elections go through SGBV.
Yeah.
If this spikes, what are we saying?
So we are saying, well, it's troubling. It's very troubling.
Yeah.
But then you notice that the violence, some of these physical violence that are perpetrated during the elections are very gendered.
Yes.
Because they're used to intimidate women. And we saw this like in its full extent, which should never be repeated again during the 2007 to 2008 general elections, especially because they were during the post-election violence period. So there was over 1,000 cases of SGBV
cases.
and that was terrible.
Yeah.
And women and children were like victims of rape because they'd been displaced, and even in the IDP camps, you find that they like people just took advantage of them in that manner. So such violence is really hard to just erase from someone's mind. And so if people are going to associate that with elections, then they would rather just not take part.
So we're actually saying that there is a case of SGBV being used against women as a deterrent to voting.
It is. It is. And not just even the voters. No, in this perspective, it even covers the candidates.
Yeah,
you find
so
that
much
a lot
for-
of candidates, they are threatened with rape. They are some of them have even been raped and had to like just decide
Yeah,
to opt out. But then now for the woman voter, you see, it kind of feels like there's nothing in it for you to gain, because maybe a candidate would decide to go through with it because at the very end of it, they're going to get the seat and probably pass policies or legislation about this. But as a voter, if you've been threatened by rape or having gone through it before, probably like
You will
it
not
really
want-
reduces your
yes.
chances of wanting to go through such an ordeal again for free. Just like you decided, you left your house and
So then the conversations about free and fair elections is not really fair, because if there are groups that cannot vote because there's danger or unsafety associated with the act of voting, then maybe the elections are not as free and fair as we speak for some of groups. And you know what? As we were talking about this, I came across a research by FIDA that said that most of the insults and abuses actually happened around funerals, gatherings, and fundraising, and churches. And looking at
that's
that list,
very troubling.
because I was like,
That's very troubling.
one, those places are representative of our society. So it is not even an issue of police. It is that we as a society uphold the norms that allow women to be abused verbally or otherwise around elections. We've almost normalized SGBV around women voters and women candidates. Yeah.
A lot. And you find it even on online, on Twitter
Yes.
or Facebook.
Yeah.
Like there's so much hatred, especially when people you'd find a woman maybe supporting a certain candidate, and people would always find a way to to issue
Trivialize,
personal attacks.
objectify,
Yeah,
you
to issue
know,
personal attacks, to like just statements which should not be there.
which are very sexually violated sometimes. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, and then now following to the 2017 elections, um, you see that during that period also around the election period, especially in August, and then on the second because there were two elections. Yeah, the second election,
Yes. The
there
runoff.
was also peaks during those periods. So like it's very consistent, and much as something something needs to be done, and some people have tried like analyzing these situations, I think there's still more to be done
Yeah.
if we are going to say that women have to be safe in these places and have to go vote. So a lot of things have to be, I think, the government, the IEBC, civil society organizations, they really have to rally behind women and ensure that there are safety, safety and precautionary
Measures
measures, yeah,
are taken.
are taken to ensure that these do not become like that recurrent. Because if it's a graph that keeps speaking
Picking
during
up.
elections, then as a woman, you also just kind of need to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And that means abstaining or like just not taking part in the
This
entire
is true.
process.
And also, I think also the nexus between, crime, elections, SGBV, needs to be researched way before the elections, especially if you're going to talk about, free and fair democratic processes, especially for women or other marginalized group. But tell me, Joy, as a young person, I know for myself, even as a young woman, uh, the conversations around free fair, and especially because now we have, three running mates for the presidential
Who are
race
women.
who are women. And I think the number is higher for just generally for women who are running. I think even for me, it's not as straightforward, because as you grow older, I think you realize that your interests are not necessarily covered or represented. But it's also there's an apathy that is growing among young people because you know what I mean. It's almost like it's kawaida. It's seasons come, seasons go, and I don't know what you feel because for me, I as much as I'm in this space, I'm a bit jaded.
I feel the same. I feel it because much as we are trying to move away from the ethnic, whatever kingpins as political leaders, not that we're looking at issues, I also want a regime that will focus on the issues I care about. And for me, currently, I am a young mother, a first time mother. My son is just 4 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And you look at all the manifestos and all the campaigns, no one is talking about the children. And so
Yeah.
because it's something I really care about, I care about social issues. I want to look at my environment and feel that this place is safe. Yeah. The number of alcoholics, for example, in the society, how is the government gonna take care of that? Like, yes, you want to build roads, but if the society is broken, if a lot of people have depression, anxiety,
But also the cost
they
of
lack
living.
jobs, yeah, the
Yeah.
cost of living is high. And if there are no remedies to these circumstances, then how do I feel assured that the life I've brought to this world is going to be safe? And like right now, I'm just keenly thinking about that, looking at all the skyscrapers, for example, in Gong Road or like all in all our estates, but there's no equivalent in such as playgrounds and art communities and just places that will ensure safe development for children. Then it makes me really wonder, like, what kind of a future is this, and what kind of a regime am I voting in that will probably stay here for 10 years and live when this child is a teenager with no future that we've been building. Like I feel like it's very self-serving of them to want to appeal to the voting crowds and not talk about the
Generations
people,
of the
yeah,
future.
the generations that will suffer
The
or enjoy,
consequence.
yeah,
Yeah.
or enjoy the consequence of their regime.
Yeah.
So for that reason, it also puts me at a very I feel apathetic about the entire situation, the entire voting process, because I can't see my interests represented in that manner in the several candidates. And I really applaud women for taking up spaces, for like it's a big step that we've come to have maybe the first woman chief justice and all these women
Cool.
as running mates. But then we can't just be blind by the fact that we are represented in that banner and refuse to acknowledge the aspect of issue-based
Issue-based
politics and
politics, yeah.
policies, yeah, that need to be put in place to ensure that even as a woman voter, I feel confident that a lot of the things that I care about are gonna be sorted, or like I can rally behind someone and be sure that this person will look at
But
this.
look at this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insight. This has been a good conversation.
Thank
And
you.
I mean, to look out for how SGBV patterns and elections are related and how that can be a deterrent to, the voting rights of young women. But more than that, we expounded on how the economic stability of a country actually zeroes into either participation or lack of participation for young women. And I'm so thankful that you came to us. This has been Swaiba, the Audible African Woman, Kenya Election Series, and we are going to have many of this. Please tune in, share, subscribe, and like. Asante sana.